Hi, Hunter. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great and looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. So before we jump into the questions here, I just want to invite the audience uh, that they are welcome to participate. You can ask your questions and comments in the chat at any time. And me and my speaker today and the speakers throughout the day would love to hear from you. So Carol, before we jump in, I read a little bit about your bio. Is there anything you'd like to share about your career journey and anything you'd like to just check in with today?
Sure. So as Hunter mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of iRelaunch, and we work with both employers, the demand side of the equation to create formal career reentry programs, and we also work with the relaunchers themselves. We call them relaunchers on the quote supply side. And I will add that I am a relauncher myself. I worked on Wall Street and in the late 80s, a very long time ago, and I was on maternity leave with my first child when my company collapsed. So I had no company to return to. I had 3 more kids in close succession. I was home with them for 11 years. And then I returned to work in 2001 when no one was talking about this to an investment firm because there were people who have worked with me a dozen years before at that Wall Street firm. So that's the only reason I got hired. And it's a very different picture today now that there's so much organized activity around formal career reentry programs, most of which are returnships. But the important thing is that I have been through every stage of this transition firsthand and feel directly connected to everyone who goes through this process, wherever you may be, whatever stage you may be at right now.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really, I think, helpful to hear our listeners to know that you have experienced this. So thank you so much for opening up and letting us know that. So let's zoom out for a second. And can you start by, you shared a little bit about your own personal experience. Can you start by defining what a returnship means and who other possible returnees could be, either in the current client or perhaps in more the whole picture climate, excuse me, in the current climate? Yeah.
Sure. So first of all, let me just talk about returnees or relaunchers, who's in the population. We look at the returning professional population very broadly. People take career breaks for a whole range of reasons. Most people in the pool are women who take career breaks for childcare reasons, but there are men who do that, and women and men who take career breaks for reasons that have nothing to do with childcare. It could be elder care or pursuing a personal interest or personal health issue, or you're unretiring, or you're a trailing spouse or partner with a partner who had an overseas assignment. Maybe you're a military spouse, or you were in the military and then took a career break after your military service. Or maybe simply you took time for something personal or extended travel, or even trying maybe an entrepreneurial venture that didn't work out. So a lot of different reasons why people take career breaks, but the common factor is that these reasons have nothing to do with your work performance. It's usually for some kind of external factor. And as we say at iRelaunch, high performers don't lose their ability to be high performers simply because they take a career break. And our mission is to normalize career breaks and normalize the career path that includes the career break. So just want to start with that broad picture about who might be considered eligible for an employer career reentry program. And as far as returnships are concerned, returnship is a type of career reentry program that employers offer to engage with the high caliber pool of people returning after career breaks. And about 80% of the career reentry programs around now are what we call returnships. So it is an internship-like experience. Some people think about it as a mid-career version of a entry-level student internship program. It's much more than that. The roles are appropriate for people who have had work experience already. There are elements to this program where there's transitional programming and mentoring and usually a cohort structure, but as we're seeing, sometimes people don't come in as a cohort. So that is one type of program. The critical piece about it is you are in this internship-like experience for anywhere from 8 weeks to 2 years. Most of them are probably 12 to 24 weeks. And while the role isn't guaranteed at the end, the best programs have an open headcount role attached to each returnship with the intent to hire and the expectation that the person that they're bringing on board is going to convert, as opposed to the possibility. That's something that's evolved over time. The other 20% of career reentry programs are what we call direct hire, where employers hire people as an employee from day one. You still benefit from these transitional support elements that I described that are part of a returnship, but there's no conversion at the end because you're already hired. So that's a broad overview of what career reentry programs are and the subset of returnships.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so awesome to hear about when you were describing the destigmatizing, destigmatizing this concept, right? And it's like you were describing from your own experience, it was a very different landscape, 20, 30 years ago, as opposed to now, where this is becoming a much more normalized experience for a lot of people that are coming in, and that there are folks like you with, iRelaunch that can help this transition and making it possible and making it happen. So I think there's, the stigma for the outside is, that there's like, oh, what are you doing coming back? And also for the people doing it, I imagine there was stigma around it as well. Like, oh, I have to go back to work, and the emotional processes that must be going through the individuals that are accepting that they're going back to work as well, right?
Yeah, relaunching is different from a typical job search because most of us who have been professionally disconnected for an extended period, myself included, feel over time a diminished sense of self because our society attaches so much importance to our identity as people in terms of what we do for work. Then when we don't have that as part of the equation, we can experience this diminished sense of self. We can lose confidence. We have to build that back up again. We have to reskill or upskill, especially if we've been out for a long time or if we're in a very fast changing field. We have to reinvigorate our networks, in addition to all the regular things you might do in a job search. So that's why relaunching is different. And it's also in part because why this pool was a hidden talent pool. You're not counted in the employed, certainly. You're not counted in the unemployed either if you are not actively looking for work. So when you're on career break, you really are in a hidden pool. So we can talk a little bit if you want about why we believe career breaks aren't going away, and we expect to see more career breaks than ever going forward. But certainly the pandemic had a lot to do with that, and normalizing the career break and lessening the stigma attached to the career break.
Yeah, we can definitely jump in a bit about that. I'm also curious, when you were mentioning there is a comparison, and it's inherent in the word too, with the internship versus the returnship. And, as when you think about an internship, maybe someone's right out of college, they're getting coffee for a firm or something like that. But this is a very different experience than that. There's more, like you said, there is, for some of these opportunities, folks are actually on track to get the job, and then there's other high probability that they might. So what are some of the things that, I'm sure it varies depending on the career path, but what can folks expect when they're jumping into it and actually involved when they're doing the returnships?
Mm-hmm. So the best programs are programs that are not only viewed, for simplicity's sake, I guess, as a mid-career version of an entry-level student internship program, but also as a leadership development program, because these programs really originated as gender diversity programs. They originated on Wall Street, actually, and Wall Street and financial services drove the first wave of these programs. The sense of urgency was around, we don't have enough women in mid to senior level roles. So they saw over time, and I think one of the reasons Wall Street led this is because those companies are so old that they had generation after generation of people go through all these different life stages, seeing women leave every time that promotions happened, and then suddenly it was like, wait a minute, we have to fix this problem. So where can we find a primarily female pool of people who have work experience? And the thought was, people who go on career break, let's meet them on the other side of their career break and bring them into roles where they will be poised and ready to move up into more senior positions over time. So many of these programs still start as gender diversity programs, but once they expand because managers see who's coming in the door and the caliber of the participants, then they can be brought into the more mainstream talent acquisition strategy. So just to give people that context. Now, in terms of what happens when you're in one of these programs, first of all, it's important to note that these programs are competitive, and that's one of the reasons that we want to supply and support the relaunchers at iRelaunch and other relaunchers who want to come take advantage of our resources, specifically with tools to enable them to relaunch in the way they want to relaunch. Not everyone wants to relaunch at a big employer that has a career reentry program. There's all different ways to do that. But should that be your preferred option, we do a lot to provide community and supply tools to bring you step by step through a process and advise on very specific things like how you should portray your career break on your resume if you're applying to a career reentry program, as opposed to if you're applying to a typical role that is not part of one. And there's some specific things that you can do there. But so let's say you get selected, you're part of these one of these programs. As I said, many of them, you come in as a cohort. So you're coming in with a group of people who are experiencing this very significant life transition, personal, professional, at the same time, as a group. And the bonds that can be created among the cohort members that are going through this together, as you can imagine, can be pretty strong and last a long time, way beyond the program itself. We at iRelaunch will first do, when we're working with employers, we are first prepping all the stakeholders, all the people who are going to be in contact with the returning professionals once they're inside the program. Managers who are managing a relauncher for the first time, recruiters who are looking at profiles and interviewing relaunchers for the first time, mentors, buddies, program managers, other people who are involved in the program to understand who's the relauncher, what is their mindset, what are they worried about, what are they excited about, how to interview them, what you say and how you conduct your first meeting with them, what to expect on their learning curve as time goes by. So that happens first. Then when we work with the participants in the program, we usually start out with an intensive orientation that normalizes a lot of the things that they're worried about. So their concerns, we talk about what it's like to move through stages of a learning curve, how to build back up your confidence, conversations with your manager, how to approach what will a midterm evaluation, how to not be afraid to ask a question. And we give a lot of examples, and we even show videos of relaunchers who have been part of these programs at different points and what they're thinking about, and what it means as they progress. So we do that first. That's part of programming, and then we would also meet with the group at the midpoint at the end point. Right before they might have a midpoint evaluation, right before they are going to be discussing with their manager the conversion decision, if it's a returnship, program. And then other elements of programming could be the meeting with other people who have relaunched their careers in the past who are at that employer, whether they've already been through the program, they're alumni of the program, or if the program's running for the first time, people inside the organization that took career breaks that everyone forgot they ever took a career break because they've been back, for a number of years. Hearing from executives about different parts of the business, having conversations with teams, multi-generational teams, having professional development modules about executive presence or making presentations or tips on conducting yourself in a virtual environment, since for so many of us, you might have a hybrid role or a virtual role. So all of those kinds of professional development elements. And then there are also opportunities for the participants to be connected just on their own. So they sometimes meet on their own to have an informal lunch. They have they're connected on a thread where they can share resources. So those are just some of the parts of the experience you might encounter if you're part of one of these programs.
I love hearing how detail oriented this is for the individual on something as, I wouldn't say basic, but as something as necessary as what you can expect or how to feel confident to ask a question, to those check-ins, to that broader, it goes all the way from the inside to the outside of these larger pictures. That's really, really exciting to hear about. And I also want to circle back to how you said a lot of these started with Wall Street. And so, when in this context of now with possible economic uncertainty coming up, currently, can you speak to the history of returnships with the past two recessions and how that might inform us moving forward for possible returners?
Yes, and actually, before I say that, I just want to add something important to my commentary about the experience itself. Of course, the focal point of your experience is the actual role that you have and the work that you're doing. There could be a training element to that. There could be a shadowing element to that. There could be, we're just going to throw you into the mix and, see how things go. These programmatic elements enhance the experience, but we're very careful in terms of how much outside programming we include, because we know first and foremost, each participant wants to do the best work they can in the actual role that they have. So just want to make sure that I emphasize that. Now, in terms of what we can learn from the prior recession. So at iRelaunch, after I relaunched my career, I later left that and wrote a book called Back on the Career Track about the whole process of relaunching, and it came out in 2007, which was the same year that we co-founded iRelaunch, and we had already been active in the space even before the company was official. So that means that at iRelaunch, we have been ourselves through the first two recessions, the recession of 2008, the more recent recession, the 2020 recession attached to the pandemic. And now we'll see, every other day we're having the recession, we're not having the recession, but whatever happens. So the first recession was pretty classic in 2008. It was, we had just launched the company. We were primarily running conferences starting in 2008, where we were bringing together employers interested in meeting relaunchers and relaunchers interested in learning about how to relaunch their career and then connect with employers that want to hire them. We've perfected that model and we've run the conference 32 times since then. And now, the focus is much more employers are there to hire and recruit and hire, and relaunchers are there to get hired. In 2008, it was, we were at the beginning of this. So what was fascinating to us is, of course, we started right as we're going, a recession is beginning, and then we ride it right into the depths of the recession, 2009, 2010. And we didn't really recover from that recession, if you look at economists' views on this, till around 2013. So what was really interesting was to see every time we ran a conference, and we used to run them every quarter during that period, we'd have more and more employers sponsor. And we were always curious, why are you interested in sponsoring? So at the time, because relaunching, which was a much newer concept, there was an educational element to it and we want to be face-to-face with these relaunchers. We used to run it in person, now we run it virtually, but we want to be face-to-face with these relaunchers because we want to understand who are they and how serious are they about working and what kind of conversations do we have with them. So there was that educational element of it. But the most interesting was how forward-looking these employers were as we're riding into the depths of the recession. Things looked terrible from a labor market perspective, pretty much across sectors, a little different than we saw this last recession where it was very sector specific. And the companies or the employers were there because they were pipeline building for the future. And they thought, we want to start building a pipeline of this population because we're discovering they're high caliber. And when we're ready to turn around and start hiring again, we want to be already have connections with a big pool of them. So that was very, very interesting to us in the first recession. In the 2020 recession, which, as you know, was a much stranger recession that was, of course, triggered by the pandemic, we saw very uneven impact on sectors. Some sectors benefited hugely, some, of course, were decimated. And what we did see, though, was actually we saw maybe there were a few programs that if they were going to launch in 2020, some of them postponed the launch for 2020 into what became 2021, and most of them relaunched then. Some of them went ahead and launched. There are a couple of the highest performing programs in terms of volume of people going through them and fast on up. The on-ramping of the program itself was Wells Fargo's programs and Cognizant's programs launched during the pandemic, and they're both fast-growing programs that have really high conversion rates. So that was pretty interesting. We saw TD's program launch in January of 2020, and then to be more of an in-person traditional model, and then have to completely morph into a virtual model, and they did some changes along the way. We saw JP Morgan Chase's program, which was supposed to launch around March, April 2020, delay that launch a little bit, but then completely changed the length of the program and what it was going to look like in a virtual model. So we were seeing that kind of, just to give you some very specific examples of what was going on employer by employer. But, there were certain sectors where we saw a lot of the tech companies that were experiencing a surge in growth during that time were expanding their programs quickly. So we actually saw scale happening to some of the bigger tech programs that we hadn't seen to that point. So I guess it was a mixed picture industry sector wise, but again, from a labor market standpoint, we saw, I think at the height of the pandemic, 2.3 million women and 1.8 million men withdrew from the labor force. So the other response that we were seeing from career employers running these programs was either they reduced the minimum length of career break time from 2 years to 1 year to be eligible to capture some of the people who were withdrawing from the labor force during COVID, or Goldman Sachs even had a special COVID cohort, and there were a couple of programs. I think Goldman's program, their traditional returnship, and General Motors program, which got completely reimagined during this time. So lots and lots of activity and lots of growth in terms of how many employers were contemplating programs and launching them. I guess the only other thing I'm going to add there, because there's so much to talk about there, is that we saw the first state returnship program launch, the state of Utah, Return Utah, and that was significant for many reasons, but it happened during the course of the pandemic. So a real mix of activity, but overall a surge of activity among career reentry programs during that time.
That is so fascinating and that's also very exciting and interesting to hear a statewide returnship program. I'm thank you for sharing that. I wasn't familiar with that one. We have just a couple just a couple minutes left. If companies want to start a returnship program, I'm sorry. Little frog in my throat. If they want to start a returnship program, what's the first step they should take?
Well, what's great right now about starting a program is there's so much data and there's so many examples out there about what's worked and what hasn't worked and how programs have tweaked over time. So I'd say that research piece is really important. Also, though, finding an executive champion, someone senior in the organization who is going to be the senior sponsor, go to bat, run interference, and perhaps launch the program in their particular line of business for the inaugural, for the kickoff, because starting the program and getting managers on board and having the actual pilot, which becomes the template to tweak and improve over time, that's a really critical step. So having that executive champion is important. Being very specific in terms of identifying managers who may just volunteer and say, hey, I'm so excited we're having this program. I'm in. My mother, sister, relative, friend is on career break, contemplating one or returning. I know this population. I really want to make sure that we continue to grow the way we engage with this population. So that to get the buy-in by a handful of managers early on is also critical, because they have to allocate open headcount to the program. And that is usually isolated headcount that is not also in the pool for anyone to apply for. It's very specific to the program itself. So those two pieces are important. And then having a program manager or someone who owns the effort is critical in order to be the hub of activity where everything emanates from, and also to provide some continuity as the program expands over time.
Awesome. Well, Carol, we're out of time. Thank you so much for making the time today on this very important topic. If folks want to keep the conversation going with you, how do they stay connected?
Yes, please reach out to us at info@iRelaunch.com. If you go to the iRelaunch.com website, there are separate sections of the website for employers, for relaunchers, and you can click through there and it'll guide you to how to get in touch with the right people at iRelaunch, whether you're relaunching your career or your employer looking to start a return to work program.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Carol. Thank you for making the time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. I hope we get to do this again. There's so much more to talk about on this topic.
Yes, there is. Well, thanks, Hunter. Great conversation.
All right. Take care now. Have a good day.
You too.